In December 1969, two young men, John and Ace, came to London from Australia for their vacation and they stopped by Harrods luxury department store. While looking around the store, they spotted two baby lions in the zoo section on the third floor. The male and female lion cubs were about 4 months old and priced at £3,500, about $650,000 today. At the time, the sale of the fierce beasts was permitted, but the customers just looked at the lions out of curiosity. Seeing this, they gradually became sad. The female lions were sensitive to people's interference and growled, while the male lions seemed indifferent as they waddled around in their cages. John and Ace stared at him in silence for a long time. Eventually, John murmured, "Do you want to keep him?" Ace responded, "I've already given him a name." Their minds were already made up, and they named the baby lion, Christian, in honor of Christmas. John and Ace interviewed to purchase Christian. They were asked about the responsibility of owning a fierce animal, the breeding environment, and their plans for the future. At the time, it was not uncommon for wealthy and famous people to own lions, but as they grew older, they became difficult to maintain and were often eventually sold to zoos or circuses. They worked in an antique furniture store and lived in the apartment where it was located. They had a basement and thought it would be a suitable place for Christian to stay, so they asked the owner for permission. The name of the store was Sophist Cat, and when they convinced the owner that a lion would be the store's mascot, he agreed. In fact, the store's popularity increased as more and more customers came to see Christian. Thus, Christian began to live in the basement of the apartment. He usually played with a rubber ball or a bucket, and his favorite toy was a trash can, which he would roll around with over his head, showing his innocence. Lions are sociable animals and show deep affection when they recognize a member of the family. Lions rub their faces together to express their affection for each other, a characteristic similar to that of dogs. Ace says, "We cherished that tradition, too." When they parted from Christians, they would lick each other's faces and hug each other. This was the lion way of expressing affection and was an important ritual to remember their respect and love for each other. In the afternoon, Christian would take naps in the furniture department and play among the furniture. His adorable appearance was so well received that many customers came to see him, and he became very popular as the store's signature lion. Most of the customers were friendly and did not mind Christian lounging on the furniture. One female customer even liked a table with a scratch on it that Christian had scratched and bought it as is. Christian was very smart and could not only remember people's faces but also change his attitude based on their reactions. Curious and mischievous, he enjoyed sticking his paws out from behind furniture to test the guests' reactions, or to observe them closely through the cracks in the furniture. The startled guests were often quick to smile. However, there were times when his pranks went too far and he failed. One day, he caught a paw in the hair of a passing female customer, causing the startled woman to yell out. However, it was Christian who was the most surprised. He was so frightened by the woman's screeching that he ran into a crack in the furniture with his ears down and his tail drooping, and did not come out for a while. By the time Christian was 8 months old, his weight had increased from 15 to 60 kilograms, and his mane had grown long enough to make him look like a lion. At first, Christian was popular as the store's mascot, but gradually some customers became afraid of him. On one occasion, when a famous actor visited the store, he was so startled by the sight of Christian that he quietly backed away and left the store. On the other hand, Christian appeared in TV commercials and on the radio, and became a popular figure. In particular, his picture with a chick was used in a British Overseas Airways advertisement, and his mild-mannered personality became the talk of the town. However, as he grew older, his life became more cramped, and he began to show signs of boredom with his daily life in the furniture department. They looked for a new place for Christian and inquired at safari parks and zoos, but none of them were satisfactory. At the safari park, there was a fear of commercial exploitation, and at the zoo, their freedom would be restricted. The two began to seriously consider whether they could return Christian to the wild. At that time, Bill and his wife McKenna, who appeared in Elsa in the Wild, happened to visit the store. When the two discussed Christian with them, the couple showed understanding and introduced them to James, a director who works for animal protection. Then, with the help of George Adamson in Kenya, a plan was hatched to return Christian to the wild in Africa. The two were relieved that they had finally found a way to return Christian to the wild. Bill immediately contacted George Adamson and headed to Kenya to find a suitable place to return Christian to the wild. He received a reassuring reply from Adamson, "Don't worry, it will work out," and the plan was well underway. Thus, a documentary program was produced on the theme of how a London-raised urban lion returns to the land of Africa. Directed by James Hill, who also directed Elsa in the Wild. The hosts will be Bill and McKenna, and their owners, Hart and John, will also appear. Sponsorship was also secured to pay for Christian's transportation and other expenses. Until his departure to Africa, Christian would stay at the couple's home in Leith Hill, about 50 kilometers from London. It was an environment where Christian could live freely in a lush natural setting without the restrictions of the city. Christian basically lived in a large cage, but there were trees and bushes planted, and he seemed comfortable. Hart and John took turns entering the cage and snuggling with Christian. Christian seemed relieved to have the two of them nearby. The cage was surrounded by a 3.5-meter-high fence, through which we could see the couple's house and yard. Sometimes there were children playing with the dog, and Christian would wander along the fence, wanting to get inside. As a result, the ground along the fence had been trampled to the point that a path had been formed. By the time Christian had been living at Leith Hill for 3 months, the caravan in the cage began to seem smaller as Christian grew. Filming was going well and the documentary was nearing completion. Then, on August 12, 1970, Christian celebrated his first birthday. A birthday cake with a single candle was prepared and everyone celebrated, but Christian ate it up in no time. After a while, Adamson informed us that he was ready to receive us there. Then, on August 22, Christian left England and finally traveled to Kenya. Arriving at Nairobi Airport, Christian was exhausted and groggy from the long 15-hour trip from London. By the second day, however, he had fully recovered and regained his energy. Then George Adamson arrived with 2 lions. His idea was not to release Christian into the wild right away, but to let him live together with other lions and gradually acclimate him to nature. Grassland stretched as far as the eye could see. Short shrubs dot the landscape, and the silhouettes of small hills are visible in the haze beyond the horizon. This was the Kenyan prairie, a vast world that was new to Christian. At first he was puzzled and looked around cautiously, but eventually his instincts awakened and he seemed to understand that this was his home. Christian's fur color blended naturally with the landscape of this land and became a protective color. Christian, who had seemed large when he was in the furniture department of Sophist Cat, seemed much smaller in this vast wilderness. George Adamson was smaller than I had imagined, with short-cropped gray hair, a goatee, and a tired safari outfit. His appearance oozed intelligence, calmness, and firm conviction. The 2 men must have been convinced that this man could return Christian to his natural habitat. George had a deep love for lions and formed a special bond with them. He believed that he could even have conversations with them that other animals would find difficult. They left Kenya with hopes for Christian's future. Their 10 days in Kenya were short, but intense. On the day of their departure, Christian did not want to leave their side, but stared at them. It was as if he himself understood the meaning of their separation. As they got into the car, their hearts seemed to be breaking. Still, they had to make this decision for Christian's sake and for the sake of his future. The car started to move slowly, and Christian's figure gradually faded away. There seemed to be a glimmer in his eyes as he gazed at us forlornly. Christian's figure became smaller and smaller, eventually becoming a dot and finally invisible. Still, they continued to gaze in that direction. When will we see him again? Would he be alive and well? Will they remember us? They couldn't help but wonder. As they looked out of the plane window at the distant land of Africa, memories of the 9 months they had spent with Christian came back to them like a running light. Meeting him in a furniture store in London, walking together through the city, his growth, and today's parting. Tears spontaneously spilled down my cheeks at the thought of starting my life without Christian. But at the same time, there was also relief that Christian was back where he belonged. Here he would regain his life as a lion. From now on, George Adamson will let us know how Christian is doing. With his love and deep passion for lions, Christian will surely adapt to the African wilderness. Christian's future has just begun. In July 1971, the day of the reunion with Christian finally arrived. It had been a year since their last meeting. It was a deeply moving moment for both of them. Would Christian remember it? Some experts suggested that Christian's memory may have faded since he had started spending time in nature. It was said that he might be wary of people from his past and stay away from them. But George Adamson told us, "Don't worry, he will remember." We arrived at a hilly area and spotted Adamson in the distance. They waved to him and he waved back. They saw a silhouette of what appeared to be a lion from just behind me. Could it be Christian? Our hearts were pounding with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Would Christian remember us? How would he react? The lion cautiously and slowly descended the hill. As the distance between us grew closer, it became clearer and clearer. Finally, we see that the lion is Christian. Christian, whom I hadn't seen in a year, had become a magnificent lion. His mane had grown a little longer, and he had grown stronger from all angles. Their hearts were filled with emotions that they could not contain. "Christian!" John called, and Christian came running up to him like a happy dog. His body had grown and he weighed a whopping 140 kilograms. Still, he remembered them as he had in the past, and his heart was filled with joy. Christian jumped on them, squealing with delight and licking them flippantly. They staggered under Christian's weight, but took turns hugging and sharing their joy. In that moment, they felt how much Christian was loved and how happy he was to be back in nature. It seems like a long time, but it was only a moment, and when we close our eyes, it seems like yesterday. We were instantly drawn to you that day when we stumbled upon you in Harrods department store. It was a lot of money, but we didn't mind at all if I could spend time with you. Whenever we called out to you, Christian would jump up and down and give his big body to us. He was mischievous and often jumped on me from behind. We don't think you are alive anymore, but we are sure your children have become great offspring and are still running around the African savannah. John also says, "Those were the days when I lived with Christian in the basement of our London apartment. The feeling of holding each other, the time we spent driving together in the car. We will never forget those exciting and eternal times when our dreams and anxieties were intertwined. Forever." Translated with DeepL.com, free version.